Kia ora rā tātou, ngā mihi ki a koutou katoa, no Aotearoa. I'd just like to greet everyone who is listening in and say a warm welcome and a warm hello to you all from here in Aotearoa, which is getting close to midnight and it is dark and starry outside. I'm going to share with you a little bit about what I do, and at first a little bit about myself and the lens and perspective that I come from. So finding Māoritanga in a colonised and culturally erased space. So we have a long-standing relationship with Great Britain and the Crown, your Crown. So Māori is my indigenous culture. It's my identity. In New Zealand, we have Pākehā and Māori and everyone else. But our bicultural contemporary nation is based on an invitation from our Māori people for the Crown and people to settle here, and therefore we've created Aotearoa New Zealand today. Sorry, this is quite tricky to, here we go. So what I want to unpack, some of you, I'm not sure how familiar you are with New Zealand, and but to be Māori is a word from our culture which now we identify with as our way, but basically it just means normal, usual, natural, common, ordinary and everyday. Māoritanga means Māori culture, Māori practice and beliefs. It's a measurement, a unit of measurement of Māoriness or a Māori way of life. And of course, resilience, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties and toughness. So here in Auckland, resilience is a really big word, and what we're facing for a future, our future in a world of burning lands, feverish pandemics, and global warming, sea rise, and how we as an island nation can recover quickly from these difficulties that we face. Being Māori is being resilient. This is a painting by a Māori woman painter, contemporary artist called Robin Kahukiwa. And this shows a perspective of Māori culture in a colonised space. So the impacts of colonisation that have landed on our shores has created a whole lot of social issues for our Māori people and our way of life. So this might be perceived as what is normal, what is being Māori, but it is far from the truth. This painting is quite confrontational, but like all good illustrations, it speaks 1,000 words. When I saw this painting, I really felt that she had nailed it. She had nailed the social and urban situation of our indigenous people in the city. But that is not what being Māori is. These are social issues. This here is an image of my community, my family, at a central place of importance for our community and our cultural practices and our way of life, and that is called a marae. In its built form, it is our ancestral meeting house, and as you can see, it's highly ordered, structural. There's lots of hierarchies and strong social cohesion, strong family and support, vibrant and has a strong identity in its built form and its expression and art forms and everything else that goes around that central community. This day, this is quite a formal situation. We have the pai on the maho, which is the veranda and a seating arrangement of our leaders. And we're about to meet the Crown, who is our agency in New Zealand, and at the moment where we will be settling our grievances. So this is taken in 2009, and it was a big day for our tribal group. These are some words I want to talk about. So if we go back to that image of my people on their marae, I can say that I was raised in a diet of mana motuhake, which is autonomy, tino rangatiratanga, which means authority over our lands and resources. And I was also nourished by the values of kaitiakitanga, which means reciprocal duty of care to lands and resources. Also, wairuatanga, spirituality, connection to place, our ancestors, and tangata whenua. This was normal every day, and it wasn't anything special. It was who we are. We live close to our history and close to nature. This year in May, a kaumātua, a well-regarded elder of mine and actually of the design community in Auckland, wrote to me during our COVID-19 lockdown. E hene, he said, which is girl. You know, it's an endearment to me. Oh, how we need disruptors to remind the state, the courts, the Eurocentric education system and media of why we as kaitiaki guardians, oh, it's jumping around all over the show, sorry, need to look after our paradise, not to nurture it and not to plunder it. How this relentless assault on whenua, land, ocean and forest continues, that we are now facing the consequences of the past 8 weeks, May 2020. So the world was grappling with a pandemic. From a Māori point of view, it was not an isolated incident. It is our continuous blunder to plunder and live beyond our sustainable means, in which we are left with these uncertainties. Another elder in this year said to me, we must find a way to achieve this ehene, to change the socio-economic and cultural trauma, cost and history of our nation, to heal what has been destroyed, broken, but not obliterated. How do we do this? How do we go about it? So I have a background in Maori art, planning and urban design, and my role is work with Māori urban authorities and iwi authorities and embedding their value systems into urban development, council developments and projects. So how I face the world is from a very centric core of what's important. To me, I love art, I love being Māori, and I love Tāmaki Makaurau, our city. So what it is about art that brings us together and holds our value sets so that we can have a place in our city centre. Some time ago, one of our great leaders, Sir Apira Nanata, championed, a great leader of vision and a champion of Māori equality. He was a parliamentarian in the 1920s in New Zealand, which was a really turning point in time for Māori people. They had just suffered the influenza. They had come through a time of tumult when their social order and way of life was now a minority in their own nation, with a huge influx and growth of settlement and taking of their lands. He said, Māori artists will arise, and with them, they will bring their ancestral genius and rise to their demands and opportunities of the day. So the weight of all the social, environmental injustices that have occurred for Māori from Pākehā settlement on our shores has meant fear, subjugation, poverty and death for our people. New Zealand's gain has been ultimately at Māori's loss. The cultural survival of Māori culture was not part of the great white hope that had landed here. The fact that Maoritanga has survived and that it is still alive and kicking is a demonstration of Māori resilience. And we are now seeing the return and rise of mana Māori. This is not because of Pākehā humanitarianism or goodwill, but that Māori instinct, tenacity, that our renaissance is regenerated through searching for that which is lost. This is where our art holds that kōrero, that narrative, those stories, those values. Art is food for one's soul, and it is also uplifting. When I see Māori art and design or identity embedded into our streets, I'm proud to be Māori. I see our culture, our stories, and our values. I see what is sacred, precious, symbolic of my identity, and what perpetuates our ancestors, validating all that I love and identify with. Apirana also said that he would leave us with a dream, and a dream that I and many friends have treasured through the years, that elements of the old Māori culture, the things that belong to this beautiful land, may be preserved for the New Zealand nation. And in the 1980s, we saw this with Te Māori, where our treasures and our taongas were brought out into the world, and it was displayed in an exhibition in New York. A lot was embraced about this identity through our material and visual culture. And a lot can be said about our heart, our spirit, and that we're closely linked to art. 3 years ago, our team in the Auckland Design Office at Council embarked on a research project where we did an audit of our city centre, and we wanted to find out what elements there were in the built environment that contributed to our identity, to Māori identity. One driver for the Auckland plan, which is our vision for the city, is that we are now embracing this identity, and that is important. And so we needed to understand and kind of get some data about behind what this meant, what elements we had in our city. So a pedestrian audit was done, and we found categories that were underperforming and categories that were performing. And one of those, surprisingly, was public art. And we found that we had an extensive collection of Māori-made art or Māori art that values and expressions of Māori narratives and themes that were in our city centre. Surprisingly, what we did find is that the town plan that was imposed on our city had no Māori names apart from one, which was Karangaha Hape Road, and it used to be an old track that led to a special place, a special man called Hape, that was utilised by Māori, and that still remains. However, it had been abbreviated to K Road, and that's a big part of its identity in our centre. There are a few other names that hold ancestral identity in a new area that during the 90s was redeveloped by one of our iwi groups, Ngāti Whātua, in the downtown area, in which their streets became, they were named after important identities in their history. But what we found that here in the streets of Auckland City was a diverse collection of Māori art and design elements that have been embedded into the fabric of our city and accessible to all. Upon closer look, what these works revealed was the Māori and shared histories beneath the modern facade of our city. And they offered clues and insights into the rich indigenous culture, Māori values, knowledge, and ways of being that are less visible today. They help make our place. We call this project Te Paparahi Toi, which means footsteps, art footsteps. And this successful and has become a successful and publicly well-received project. We developed it into a series of maps based around the knowledge held in the artworks, and a booklet was produced, and an app, a digital app, was promoted for people to utilise. And what it revealed was that Pākehā too identify strongly with Māori art and have a genuine love and affinity. It helps them identify as New Zealanders. It is what helps them feel distinctive and different from the rest of the world. So often what is not known is the journey behind the works, and that the intention of Paparahi Toi is to give thanks and acknowledgement and to attribute the iwi, the hapu, and the whānau, who have played a significant part in the inspiration and processes behind these works. And most importantly, to highlight all the tangata whenua artists, local architects and designers who continue to innovate and define Tāmaki Makaurau. The booklet and app showcase 60 artworks categorized into 8 themed walks, and consists of the tools as I mentioned before. So it was a real project of love to curate this booklet, and we're now up to our 3rd edition. So that gave us a baseline to understand our city a little bit more and to share it with others. So what we really needed to work on, here's some slides of the pages and some of the artworks that we're highlighting. And what we found is that Māori art has many, many forms and has many ways of expressing itself, and it's not limited to traditional means, although ancient values can be brought forth into it. This is what we call a waharoa, or a gateway, and it was done by Selwyn Muru Painga, who has recently passed away, but an amazing carver and contemporary artist. So he was part of the Māori modernist movement, who were influenced by, they came out of the art schools of the 1960s and were really influenced by modernist thinking. However, he was a carver and he utilised traditional means of making. And what's so wonderful about this piece of work, it's quite old now, it's been I think there since the 1980s, and this is the Altis Square. So this is a civic space, this is behind our town hall, and what this waharoa is a gateway into a traditional area, a marae, like I showed earlier with my family sitting lined up. And there's an ancient Polynesian ritual of welcome, and you need to enter through this into a sacred atia or a space, which this gateway enables these kind of ancient practices of tikanga or process in our city centre. So here in a civic welcome, Māori can participate and lead the procession when dignified people arrive, or when we have civic events through this gateway. We can practice the realm of the art of porphyry or welcome in a public space, which Olivia, sometimes yes.
So just to save time-wise, I know it's already clunky, I can't hold up a card, but you've got about 3 or 4 minutes left before we go to Q&A. Thanks.
So what I'm just going to flick through some of this work here that is Māori art, showcase into Paparahi Toi, and just talk about Māori design. It's not about place theming. What we've found here in one of our recent spaces to open up is that Indigenous people, including Māori worldwide, are ecological innovators. They live in highly complex natural systems and are spiritually connected to their landscapes. This is when we embed Māori ancient values and into civic infrastructure, such as this new ferry basin development, we have outcomes of environmental care being embedded into the design. So it's not just about artwork and embellishment of the space, but how we make spaces. Our stormwater filtration is 100% pure before it goes out into the Waitemata, as that is a value of preservation and restoration of our harbours. So what I want to say is that when we are going forward into the world and we work with indigenous people who have the knowledge of complex ecosystems and a memory that it's really, really vital that we work together using our technology and innovations to create space, but to embed their values to help prioritise a way forward for a healthier, environmentally safer future.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. That is just a wonderful launch to the conference, and a few questions that have come through, which are random and all over the place. So one was, you mentioned, if that's okay, so just get ready for these to fly in. So one was around the digital app. Somebody had asked that you said you'd collected kind of feedback from the community through a digital app. Could you say a bit more about what that was and how you did it?
So we had an empty lot that was going to be transformed into a what's currently being built into a new underground station, but it was empty for some time, and we recreated a public space, an information portal which we designed around Māori values, embedded into it, and from there people were able to access the app. You can still access it actually if you go to the App Store and Google Auckland Tours, AKL Tours, and you can find Te Paparahi Toi there. So we get feedback all the time. People are really looking for Māoritanga in our spaces. It's not visible in our city. We're starting to get momentum to change that. And we're up to our third edition of Te Paparahi Toi now, in which there's 20,000 publications made every year. So they're being swallowed up.
Okay, great. And then another question was around what's next. So that you said you've done the piece of research, and then you were telling us about what that had brought through. What was it, the Launchpad 2, and what are your next plans in terms of either research or practice?
This next came a whole series of heritage and art week programming, in which we celebrated marae, built forms in our street, and had photographic exhibitions, and we also had a whole lot of celebrations of Māori artists and how we embed their so they're local Māori artists from the tribal groups, so sort of profiling them, creating an awareness around the work that they do, and we've also been able to embed them into design processes. So we have beyond engagement, we have them now co-designing our public spaces. So we've got a large waterfront area that's been open for redevelopment. I just started touching on it at the end, where our artists have been working, and we saw with landscape architects commissioned into the space. We have here Tessa, who is from Ngaitai ki Tāmaki and an Eva group, and she is, this is if you can see the render at the top, this is a public space, and we have a seating arrangement it's over the water, so it's a new harbour. So the kaitiaki, or kind of representatives of her tribal groups, or a group of tribal groups, have been heavily involved in establishing the design values based around working with the landscape architects and urban designers to create this space. And Tess was an artist mandated by her tribe and to work even more closely with the designers. And she's created this webbing, which is based on a really old weaving technique or basketry, and it's made out of like a Teflon nylon that is, we call it the kupenga, where people will sit. A kupenga is a net that's around harvest of sort of seafood. And so those are all embedded into our space. The planting and the management plan of the selection of endemic species for the gardens, how they support biodiversity, and all that's been thought through by kind of rongoa and specialist. Rongoa is herbal medicine, but they sort of understand all the native forestry and plants. So the selection of plants and species is endemic to our coastal area and how we're regenerating that space with iwi groups. We're calling it co-design with an aspiration for design partnership.
Great.
And it is breaking new ground.
Well, you certainly are. And that, I've got a number of questions here that I've got to fly at you, because then we'll be going on to the breakout group. So here's one from, sorry, I didn't name the people before. My apologies to you. Marcus Wilcox says, Olivia, what would you say are the best questions to ask to ensure local community and individuals' culture are included, reflected and celebrated through shared neighbourhood and city spaces? So what are the best kinds of questions to ask?
To ask community? I think I always turn it around, and I believe when working with groups, we need to take an approach where we do all the listening. I know we need to provoke them and to promote, but often it's done in a presentation or consultative manner and not in an engaging and inclusive manner. So first of all, I wouldn't be asking questions because it's like taking. I would establish a relationship initially and really work on that, building trust, building all the good points of a strong and healthy relationship with your community, understanding who the leadership is, what their customs and how they feel comfortable, until you have a point. Of course, there's always time constraints and pressures, but it's really important establishing the relationship first so you can listen and understand their needs. I always believe that people of place are the experts of place. We're in a privileged position as technical experts, but we shouldn't be telling people of place what they need to do with their space, because they will have a better and bigger understanding and relationship than we do. So I always say, design and think and plan with your ears first.
Excellent. That's going to be a strap line I think we'll be using for the next conference.
Okay.
Thank you. And then this will have to be our last question. And this is from Claire Richards, and that's only due to time as opposed to the amount of questions that have come through and you've stimulated, Olivia. So Claire Richards says, do you think we need a formal designation of social heritage to encompass indigenous culture, to sit alongside built heritage? For too long in the UK, we have given this precedence to the built environment, as in built heritage.
Like, every context is so different. We have various, I think if you apply a designation, I mean, if that's the dominant way of where power and authority sits, then, and those are your toolkits, then yes. For the first time, Auckland Council has set up a Māori Heritage Department, which has a unit actually within the Heritage Department, which has pretty high priority. However, all our statutory laws are not up to scratch in terms of protection. So there's a lot of work to be done. And then Māori, in terms of built environment and built form, we don't have a lot. We have more sites, cultural landscapes remaining, or we have what we call taonga, which are our values on landscape and physical resources. So there's nothing so definable in taonga. And I'm finding that our management, our resource management statutes don't protect adequately our taonga at all. In fact, they still place a monetary value, and they will pay out on mitigation and able to use it, and economics always wins at the end of the day. So we still need to work out together and that's again relationships and trust, what a way forward is. And I just think that principle of partnership, as opposed to, you know, those of authority, if you can work in partnership, and it's a principle, and some will have the power, some will have the authority, and it's how we share that.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you very much.